Keanu Reeves was falling in love. He just never told her. It was 1994, on the set of a movie called Speed, and across from him, every single day, stood a young actress named Sandra Bullock, who was quietly, secretly falling for him at the exact same time. Two people, the same feelings, the same movie set. And here is the part that will stay with you. Neither one of them had the faintest idea the other felt the same way. So they both said nothing. They finished the film. They walked away. And it would take 25 years, a full quarter of a century, before the truth finally came out in front of the whole world. But that isn't even the most remarkable part of this story, because the one thing these two never did in 1994 turned out to be the exact thing that would let one of them show up for the other decades later on the worst day of her life. Stay with me, because to understand how a silence became the deepest kind of love, you have to go all the way back to the beginning, to a movie that almost starred two completely different people. And there's a question at the end I really want to ask you. To understand how strange this story is, you have to know one thing. Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock were never even supposed to be standing next to each other. In the early 1990s, a script was going around Hollywood called Speed. The idea was simple and thrilling. A young Los Angeles cop has to save a city bus rigged with a bomb that will go off the moment the bus drops below 50 miles an hour. It was the kind of role every leading man in town wanted. And for a while, Keanu Reeves wasn't even the first choice to play it. Other actors were considered, Stephen Baldwin, and bigger names still, like Tom Cruise, Tom Hanks, Wesley Snipes, Woody Harrelson. The woman's role, Annie, the passenger who ends up behind the wheel, nearly went elsewhere too. It was offered to Halle Berry. She turned it down. Almost none of the people meant to be in this movie ended up in it. Through all that shuffling, two actors rose to the top. A rising young star named Keanu Reeves and a nearly unknown actress named Sandra Bullock, for whom this film would become the break of a lifetime. The director wanted to be sure they belonged on screen, so he tested their chemistry before making the final call. He did not have to look very hard. The moment these two started acting opposite each other, something lit up. It was effortless, warm, real. Years later, Sandra would describe that first spark in the simplest way. The connection, she said, was so electric that you just look at the other person and think, okay, there's my partner, there's my partner. She meant it about the movie, but looking back now, it's almost impossible not to hear something more in those words. Because what neither of them said out loud, what they carried quietly onto that set every day, was that the chemistry the world saw on screen wasn't only acting. For both of them, it was real, and it was a secret with one very obvious problem, because the moment the cameras started rolling, Sandra Bullock could barely keep a straight face. Here is what makes this story so tender. Both of them had a crush on the other, and neither one knew it. Sandra Bullock has since described what it was like to act opposite Keanu Reeves while quietly falling for him. It is one of the most endearing things you'll ever hear a movie star admit. I think about how sweet Keanu Reeves was, she said, and how handsome he was. And then she confessed the real problem. It was hard, she said. It was really hard to be serious. He would look at her, and she would just, and here, decades later, she would start to giggle like a schoolgirl, simply remembering it. One of the most gifted actresses of her generation, telling the world she could barely hold it together because the man across from her made her heart race. And Keanu, for his part, was quietly a gentleman about all of it. Sandra tells one small story that says everything. During one of the stunts, her dress kept flying up, So she asked him simply, "Whatever you do, just keep my dress down." And for that entire stunt, that is exactly what he did. Quietly, he made sure she was covered and protected. "It was very sweet," she said. That is who he was on that set. Not a movie star performing kindness for a camera, just a young man paying attention. But here is the part that aches. He never said a single word about how he felt. Not once. Years later, when he was finally asked why he'd kept it to himself, his answer was pure Keanu. Simple, humble, a little bit sad. "We were working," he said. That was it. They were working. He didn't want to make it strange or make her uncomfortable, or turn a job she was counting on into something complicated. So he locked his feelings away, showed up every day, and was good to her. Two people, the same feelings, the same months, side by side, and a silence that neither one of them would break. But before that silence set in for good, there was one more night, one more chance when everything almost tipped over, and it came down to champagne, chocolate, and the worst timing you have ever heard. When Speed came out in the summer of 1994, it was a phenomenon. It made Keanu Reeves an action star and launched Sandra Bullock toward becoming one of the most beloved actresses in the world. But before all that fame arrived, there was one more quiet moment between them, and it may be the most bittersweet part of this whole story. Not long after the film, Keanu came over to Sandra's house, and he brought something with him, champagne and truffles. He sat down on her couch, right next to her, and said something she still remembers word for word. "I just thought," he told her, "you might want to try champagne and truffles to see what it's like." Picture that scene, the two of them, alone, on a couch, champagne, chocolate, everything finally lined up perfectly, and then he left because he had a date with someone else. Sandra tells that story now with a kind of laughing disbelief. That, she said, is exactly what she means when she says it drives you a little crazy. She's also described what those early days felt like. She was nervous. She couldn't stand the quiet. When she first knew him, she would spend as much time as she could just filling the silence, trying to feel comfortable. And the more she jibber-jabbered on, the quieter he would get. One of them talking too much to cover the nerves, the other going quiet, because that was simply his way. Two people circling each other, both feeling something, neither one ever quite landing. The timing, as it turned out, was never quite right. Not then, and not for a long time after. But what these two were about to build, apart across the years, would end up mattering far more than any night on a couch ever could. And believe it or not, it started with a stack of letters. After Speed, their lives pulled them in different directions, the way lives do. Keanu's career exploded. Sandra became a superstar in her own right. They didn't work together or see each other every day. By every ordinary rule of Hollywood, this was the moment they should have quietly faded out of each other's lives. But they didn't. Sandra Bullock did something that tells you everything about what these two meant to each other. Over the years, she says, she wrote him letters, real letters, just to see how he was doing, to check on him, to stay in his life. Hold on to that detail. She wrote him letters, because what happened next is almost hard to believe. In 2006, 12 years after Speed, the two of them finally reunited for another film. And of all the stories they could have chosen, look at the one they picked. It was called The Lake House, and it was about two people separated by time who slowly fall in love by writing each other letters. Let that sink in. In real life, Sandra had been writing Keanu letters for years. And then the two of them made an entire movie about a man and a woman who can only reach each other through letters, across time. Reeves tried to explain their bond around then and couldn't quite manage it. He couldn't put into words why he and Sandra have chemistry on screen, he said. They just do. And he was glad, because he liked her tremendously as a person. It was good, he said, to have some life under their belts since the last time, because by now, more than a decade had passed. They had both lived and lost and grown up, and still, the moment they stood in front of a camera together again, that same warmth from 1994 was right there, exactly where they'd left it. And yet, after all those years, all those letters, they still had never once told each other the truth. That was about to change. On live television, in front of millions of people, it didn't come as some grand confession to each other. It came slowly, separately, in front of the entire world. In 2018, Sandra Bullock sat down for a television interview, looked at an old photo from Speed, and finally admitted it. The crush, the giggling, how handsome he was. 24 years after the fact. A few months later, Keanu Reeves sat down for his own interview, and they showed him the clip of Sandra's confession, her admitting she'd had feelings for him all those years ago. And then he said the thing that turns this whole story upside down. She obviously didn't know, he said, that he'd had a crush on her too. There it was, both of them, all along. The same feeling at the same time, hidden from each other for a quarter of a century. Each of them spent 25 years assuming it had only ever been one-sided. You might be thinking exactly what most of the world thought. Why didn't they just get together? They were both single at different points, so why not? And Sandra Bullock has an answer, a wise one. She isn't sad they never dated. In fact, she believes it may have saved everything. They didn't have to survive anything, she said. Most romances don't survive. They flare up, they burn out, and the two people walk away as strangers, or worse. But she and Keanu never risked that. They simply got to grow up together, on parallel roads, to tip their hats, to meet for dinner. And the longer time goes on, she said, the more in awe she is of the human being he is. But the truest proof of what these two had built wasn't in any interview. It was still coming, on the day Sandra's whole world fell apart. And this is where the story stops being about a crush at all. Because what Keanu and Sandra built instead of a romance turned out to be something far stronger, something that could carry real weight. Keanu Reeves has known terrible loss in his own life, more than most people ever will. He understands grief in a way very few people do. So in 2023, when Sandra Bullock lost the man she loved, her partner of many years, when she was walking through the worst kind of heartbreak there is, Keanu was there. Not as a former co-star, not as an old spark from a movie set. He was there as family. Those close to her say he was exactly what she needed in that moment. A steady presence, an extraordinary listener, a shoulder to cry on. The friend who simply showed up and stayed. Now think back to where this story began. If those two had dated in 1994, if they'd tried to turn that spark into a romance, and it had ended the way most romances end, he might not have been there for her at all when it mattered most. The very thing they never did is the thing that let him stand beside her when she needed someone most. The love they never spoke of didn't disappear. It simply changed into something more durable, something that lasts. And it is still going. In 2024, the two of them, both turning 60, sat down together to celebrate 30 years since Speed. And Sandra said something that stopped everyone in the room. Before she dies, she said she really does think she and Keanu need to do something in front of the camera again. And it turns out they will. The two of them have since announced they're reuniting for a brand new film. More than 30 years After two shy young actors first felt that spark and said nothing at all, 30 years later, they still light up at the sight of each other. Just exactly like she said, the very first time they ever stood on a movie set together. There's my partner. We like to think love stories are about the people who get together, the confession, the kiss, the happy ending. But Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock tell a different kind of love story. Theirs is about two people who felt something real and never said it, who missed their moment again and again, and who ended up with something that has outlasted almost every marriage in Hollywood. A friendship so deep that when life fell apart, the other one was simply there. Maybe the great loves of our lives aren't always the ones we act on. Maybe some of them are the quiet ones, the ones that never quite happened and turned into something we get to keep for the rest of our lives. So here is what I wanted to ask you, and I promise I really do read every comment. Is there someone you never told how you felt? Someone from years ago? A person you still think about and quietly wonder what might have happened if only one of you had said something? Tell me about them down in the comments. You don't have to use a name. Just tell me the story. I would truly love to read it. And if this reminded you of someone, maybe they're worth a phone call today.